Hey guys, what's up? How you doing? Welcome back to another MLB DFS Slurve video here at No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Today is Wednesday, September 23rd, 2020. We're talking main slate DFS baseball for tonight. 8 total games as we dive into FanDuel here available for us tonight. So in general, a smaller slate, not the smallest in the world, but certainly a smaller slate compared to the last couple of days. Nonetheless, there's some exciting spots I think that you can get a hold of tonight. I think there's some interesting pitching options, some interesting stacking options, and some one-off bats that we're going to discuss here on the channel, on the video, all the good stuff you need for DFS tonight if you're into that, if you're into MLB DFS. Otherwise, I'm not sure why you're here, but thank you for being here. Of course, if you're new here, if you watch these videos daily, weekly, first time here, monthly, yearly, whatever it is, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. I would really appreciate that. We are trying to grow this channel to 1,000 subscribers, hopefully 500 subscribers. That's the goal by the end of the NFL season. Speaking of NFL, we publish MLB and NFL content here on the channel, DFS specific content. Of course, we've already published our week 3 NFL sneak peek video. Go ahead, check that out. It is published here on the channel. And then every single day we're publishing MLB DFS content. That's what we're doing right here, right now. So let's jump into the main slate tonight. Like we always do, as I always mention, check out Daily Fantasy Nerd. I realize we only have a couple of days, a couple of games left for MLB, so maybe not specifically for MLB, but I'm telling you this is the best sports DFS optimizer available on the market. It's underrated. Not a lot of people talk about it. As a result, when you're building lineups from this, there's not a ton of people. You're not talking roto grinders where you have 7 trillion people building the same lineups based on the same projections. This is a great optimizer. I highly recommend it. I've used it for MLB all season long. I've recommended it all season long, and I've used it for NFL the first couple of weeks. Of course, week 2, if you haven't checked us out at No Huddle FS over on Twitter, check it out there. Absolutely crushed it. Nearly took down a major tournament. Came in 5th place. All because, why? I'm able to build multiple lineups, find value, track my bankroll, and now do analysis, projections, all the stuff you need to become a better DFS player. I do it through Daily Fantasy Nerd on top of my own research. So go ahead, check that out. Affiliate link is down in the description. It does help me out, and you get a free month. So it's worth checking out for 3 or 4 weeks of football, definitely. And as we round out the end of this MLB season. But as always, taking a look at weather here, there's no real weather concerns. The good news is for this last few days, last few weeks of baseball, it's been a really clean slate. Knock on wood, there haven't been any COVID issues, any postponements, anything like that for even weather. So generally a good night if you can see here. Now, of course, you guys need to check weather before lock, check your lineups, check your Vegas lines, all the check boxes that you need to do yourself before lock. Include weather in there. But in general, it's not looking like we have anything to worry about for weather tonight. In terms of Vegas totals, though, there are some interesting spots. You can see here 4 total teams, nearly 5 teams at 5 runs or more projected as a team total tonight. That's Minnesota, San Francisco, Chicago Cubs, and the Dodgers. And then on the other end of the coin here, or the other side of the coin, you have 5 teams below 4. So if you're targeting pitchers in terms of pitchers to start on your behalf, you want to look at Colorado, New York Mets, Miami, Pittsburgh, and Detroit, all as teams that pitchers are in good spots because of low Vegas totals. So in general, that's kind of the outlook for the slate. Weather looks good. Some interesting spots for stacks, some interesting spots for pitchers. Let's jump into the pitcher position here. First position, as always, we want to talk pitchers. It's very, very important here on FanDuel. We're going to jump into a random contest here. You can see 8 total games available for us tonight. Pitcher is more important, in my opinion, on FanDuel than DraftKings simply because you get 1 spot, and that's it. So a couple of guys stand out at the top here. You have Hendricks, Glasnow, and Kenta Maeda as all guys above $10,000. The only real interest I have tonight, to be perfectly honest with you, is with Kenta Maeda. I think he's in an excellent spot versus Detroit. Detroit has struggled all season versus right-handers. They're decent versus left-handers, but have been really, really bad versus right-handers. And Kenta Maeda this year has been pretty excellent, to be perfectly honest with you, pitching for Minnesota. Now, you can see a 2.52 ERA, has 5 wins. He is $10,000. That's expensive. I don't ever remember paying that much money for Kenta Maeda, but I think he deserves it, and hopefully that helps with the ownership tonight on him. But as you can see from just a general game log view here, has pitched very, very well this season, has already pitched against Detroit earlier in the season a couple of times, 2 times to be exact, went nearly identical games, which is pretty crazy. 3 earned runs, a shameful 3 earned runs in each game. So 3 in each, but had 8 strikeouts. So he does have strikeout upside in the right spot. I think that's the spot we're in tonight. But has gotten a quality start in both of those games against Detroit, one at home, one on the road there. So I do really like him tonight. He is pitching at home. Obviously, we like to target pitchers in terms of pitchers we want to start. Home pitchers are more of an advantage. They do pitch typically better at home. They have an advantage. All those things play better at home. Kenta Maeda, the right-hander versus Detroit, is my number one interest at pitching tonight. And to talk some numbers on him, as I mentioned, the key here is the fact that he is pitching against Detroit. If we go back into Fangraphs, again, hopefully you guys sign up for Fangraphs. It's a free source. It's the best source for stats for baseball. Definitely check that out. But I've sorted this, of course, for 2020. This is teams generally, their lineups versus right-handers, how they've been hitting. You don't find Detroit anywhere near the top. In fact, they are fourth last. So 27th overall in baseball with an 80 WRC plus. Really, really bad. 289 WOBA here, 151 ISO. So they're not even hitting for power. All really, really bad numbers. I mean, we're talking, there's a significant sample size here. We're talking nearly 1,500 plus actually for Detroit in terms of plate appearances. So again, nothing to be afraid of in terms of a lineup. Most of their bats are right-handers. So the advantage does go towards Kenta Maeda. I do want to mention the key here on top of all of that is the simple fact that Detroit strikes out a ridiculous amount versus right-handers, 28%, number one in all of baseball. That is a great number to target, a great number if you're taking a pitcher against them. That is why you see Kenta Maeda's game logs with 8 strikeouts versus these guys. I think you can expect 8 to 10 strikeouts. If we go over to Daily Fantasy Nerd, again, check this out, guys. I mean, you can see here, really, really good numbers. 6 Ks projected on the night. Only 3.16 runs projected for Detroit, the lowest on the slate. And Minnesota is a massive home favorite, the biggest favorite of all teams tonight. So that puts Kenta Maeda in a good spot for a win. I do really like Kenta Maeda as my number one pitcher on the night. Be perfectly honest with you guys, I'm not really interested in going anywhere else. There's not a lot of great options on this slate. In terms of pure arm talent, Tyler Glasnow, if you want to start him, he has all the talent in the world. He is pitching on the road in New York against the Mets. It's not an ideal spot as a park for a pitcher, and it's also not an ideal lineup to face as a right-hander. But you can't deny what this kid has done basically all season long. Ridiculous K percentages. You can see 10, 13, 9, 9. This guy has a ridiculous K percentage if we bump back over. In fact, it's sitting at 32%, which Kenta Maeda, by the way, 28%. Very, very healthy number there. You have nearly 5% more higher K percentage for Tyler Glasnow. So a great, great opportunity. Always huge arm talent for this kid. But I'm not going there. I will mention, if you focus on him specifically, I'm actually interested in probably stacking against him simply because I think teams or players, and I'm talking fantasy players, are going to play him. He's going to be a higher owned pitcher tonight. But again, just to kind of give you guys my insight on why. Now, I am a truther. I love Glasnow. I think he's one of the best young pitchers in all of baseball. So, again, I start him when I can. I believe we started him in his last start. This is what I'm looking at, though. The New York Mets are number 3 in baseball against right-handers with a 127 WRC+, 355 WOBA, 188 ISO. So just on the road against a team that does hit righties very well, a ton of lefties. Potentially that whole lineup of the Mets could be lefties tonight with switch hitters. Just not into the spot for him. So that is why I'm off Glasnow. Kyle Hendricks, if I'm going anywhere else at an expensive price, it's probably Kyle Hendricks. Pittsburgh is just dead awful. I mean, they are a bad team, bad lineup. Hendricks has pitched very well, especially over his last 4 starts, coming off a 64-point performance versus Minnesota, 10 Ks. He's up and down with Ks. He's not necessarily the biggest K guy, but in the right spot, he can get it. It's not a great spot for Ks tonight. Pittsburgh does not strike out a ton. Walking back over to Fangraphs here, you can see scrolling down the list, Pittsburgh versus right-handers, dead last in all of baseball, 58. I don't even know how you can have a 58 WRC plus this many games into a season, but they do. They strike out 25% of the time. So good spot, safe spot in my opinion. He's a favorite, but he is pitching on the road here in Pittsburgh. Kyle Hendricks. is probably my number 2 option. Anyone else I would consider? Not really. That's really it. I'm interested in stacking against a lot of these guys. A lot of these guys are in bad spots or are having bad years. So in general, as I mentioned, Kenta Maeda, my number 1. Kyle Hendricks, my number 2. Likely won't really go there. I'll probably play heavy Kenta Maeda. And then if you want to attempt to go glass now, he's definitely the most talented pitcher on the slate. Just beware. This is a boom or bust spot in my opinion. When this kid walks, bats, and gives up home runs, it can get ugly very quickly. He has, at times, struggled with control. That's not something I want to do against the Mets tonight. But those are my thoughts on pitchers. So in terms of who I want to stack against, let's first bounce back over to Daily Fantasy Nerd here. As I mentioned, several teams above 5. Of the teams projected with a ton of runs, or I should say 5 or more runs on the night, Minnesota stands out to me, and the Dodgers stand out. I am not interested in the Cubs. They have struggled all season long. I do not like stacking the Chicago Cubs. I do not agree with their number, although they may put up that. It's not something I'm interested in doing. San Francisco, I just don't stack San Francisco, although I am interested in some bats. But in general, to give you guys an outlook really quickly, I'm interested in Minnesota, the Dodgers, and Atlanta primarily as my stacks on the night. I did mention the Mets. I probably, to be honest with you guys, will take 1 stack of the Mets against Glass now, simply because of what I mentioned. I think a lot of people will go there with Glass now tonight, so I'm going to try to take advantage of a team that does hit righties pretty well. But let's start. First, bumping back here, as I mentioned, I want to attack Miz, if I can find him here, Casey Miz, the righty for Detroit. Minnesota, surprisingly, a team that you would expect to hit lefties very well, is quite the opposite on the year. They hit righties very well. Casey Miz, or Mize, however you pronounce it, I believe it's Miz, not having a great season. He's a young pitcher, has been called up. I think he's 0-2 on the season so far. He's now pitching on the road in Minnesota, a place that is known to really favor hitting, favor scoring runs, gives up a lot of home runs. It is a little cooler right now, so that does affect bats a little bit, but I'm not into Casey Miz as a pitcher. I'm into stacking against him, and that's what we're doing here. You can see his numbers are just not good. His game log is not good. He pitched earlier this season, only went 3 innings against Minnesota, 4 innings in the next start against them, 5 total earned runs in 7 innings against them so far in the season, so definitely an excellent spot. But specifically, as I mentioned, against right-handers, if we go back to Minnesota here, they're actually a top 10 team versus right-handers with a 110 WRC+, 333 WOBA, 217 ISO. They hit for power. In fact, they bump up a little bit. They're number 4 in baseball versus right-handers with a 217 ISO. So surprisingly, Minnesota very, very good versus right-handers. And I want to break that down a little bit more for you guys. Again, here on Fangraphs, we're going to dive into the Minnesota lineup, talk about which players stand out. So certain guys always hit well, right? Nelson Cruz, although I don't know if he'll be in the lineup tonight, he's always in play, whether it's a righty or lefty, specifically lefties, but always in play. Generally, whoever you're starting in terms of a stack. Now, other guys, though, that stand out, Max Kepler and Eddie Rosario, both those guys, decent, very, very good, actually. WOBAs and good WRC pluses. Both these guys do have power, significant power versus righties. Miguel Sano, a righty on righty, but for the year has hit righties very well. Another guy showing a ton of power, 300 plus ISO, 356 WOBA. I do like that spot, definitely. George Polanco, not into him. Buxton definitely in play. Will probably be hitting lower in the lineup though. So in reality, the guys you want to focus on are Buxton, Sano, Rosario, Kepler, and Nelson Cruz. Those are the stack interest guys for the lineup tonight. Again, attacking Casey Miz here, a guy that just is not very good at all. I do have some information on him if you want to look very quickly here. We talk about barrel and hard hit percentage. Both those numbers are really bad on the season for him. He's a young guy. He's one of their higher prospects. I'm not saying this guy's going to struggle forever, but as of right now, the data that we have suggests you do want to stack against him. 42% hard hit rate, 12% barrel rate. Anything above 10 is at least as far as I can tell, 10 has always been a good number. Anything above 10 mean the kid's getting hit not only hard, but they're barreling them up, which means the ball goes long and far. That's what we want to attack here, and that's why I'm interested in that Minnesota stack. Another stack I am interested in, I talked about Atlanta. I also talked about Los Angeles Dodgers. So the Dodgers are facing a lefty tonight. They are facing Sean Manaea. So in general, so this is my thought on the Dodgers. They are loaded with left-handed bats. This is not a great matchup when you have a ton of lefties versus a lefty. In fact, he has pitched, I believe already. No, he has not. So this will be his first time pitching against the Dodgers here. I thought he already done it, but apparently not. But when you can stack the Dodgers at a lower ownership, I'm always interested. And that's what I think you're going to get here. As I mentioned, they are one of the lower projected totals on the night. Not low, but they're not top 5. I believe they're either 5th or 6th. So they're going to go ignored. People will not start the lefties for the Dodgers. They're going to go under-owned. We're on a smaller slate. Let's take advantage of that. And more importantly, the right-handed bats of the Dodgers are values. Those guys are not the heavy hitters. They're not the guys that people pay a ton of money for in fantasy baseball. So that you can get a cheaper exposure to the Dodgers. You can squeeze in a Bellinger, squeeze in, obviously Mookie Betts is going to be expensive and he's a righty. But you can squeeze in a Seager. These guys they're decent hitters versus lefties. If you expect the stack to go off, they're going to face some righties at some point. They're going to be under-owned. I really like the spot here. Bumping back, as I mentioned, the Dodgers they're 4th overall with just at 5 runs projected on the night. Again, I think you're going to see ownership just, stick with these higher total teams here, and that's why I'm interested. But specifically, the Dodgers are not a bad team. They're a great team versus righties, and they're not bad versus lefties. In fact, versus lefties on the season, if I sort my stats here correctly, you will notice that the Dodgers come down a bit. They're, I think, 1 or 2 versus righties. They're 14th overall versus lefties, 104. So still a top half of the league team. Specifically, the guys you want to take out of that lineup are your Pollocks, and we can use Daily Fantasy Nerd here to navigate and look at some of the projected lineups. But your Chris Taylors, your Justin Turners. Will Smith is always in a good spot. He's a righty here if he's playing. He's the catcher, sometimes does not always start. But I mentioned Pollock, I mentioned Chris Taylor, Kiki Hernandez. All those guys are the righties you want to take out of this lineup. I think you're going to see it adjusted a little bit. Some of the lefties out of the top of the order here. But I do obviously like Mookie Betts. And I think get exposure to Corey Seager, get exposure to Cody Bellinger, because you're going to expect the stack to go off. And as a result, you're going to see some right-handers, and those guys mash righties. So I am really interested in the Dodgers, hopefully at a lower ownership tonight. It's kind of the logic behind that. And I do want to mention the Atlanta Braves. I am just right now an Atlanta Braves. I'm all for them, stacking them every single night. Their lineup is insane. I'm really heavy on them winning the NL. I'm really heavy on them winning the World Series. I think they're in a great spot. Pitching is a little susceptible for them, but overall their lineup is absolutely insane. In general, though, they are playing tonight versus a right-hander. If we bump over to the Vegas totals here, you can see they're not towards the top. They're actually kind of middle tier, 4.54 runs projected on the night. They're playing at home versus Miami. I always like Atlanta at home. That ballpark is just very favorable to that lineup, especially those Freddie Freeman lefties, players like that. So I think people, again, will stay away. You tend to see ownership focus on Vegas totals, so your Minnesota, your San Francisco, your Chicago. I think Atlanta's going to go ignored here at 4.54, but they are facing Sixto. I think that's how you pronounce his first name, Sixto Sanchez. Nothing really to talk about for him. I'm not saying he's necessarily a bad pitcher, but there's nothing that stands out. If I can navigate my way over to him here. Pitching on the road in Atlanta, I mentioned their total. I think a lot of people also will look at the game log here. Oh, man, just not working out for us. And notice that he has pitched against Atlanta in Atlanta earlier this season, went 6 innings, had 6 Ks, and didn't give up an earned run, so had a very good start. But I believe Albies was not yet back in the lineup. He may have been, but Atlanta right now is hot, and that's the idea. I want to attack them. This very well could be a future great pitcher. I'm not too certain. But it doesn't matter. I'm taking Atlanta against him at a lower ownership. Your Dodgers and your Atlanta, those stacks at any given night can go for 20-plus runs. And that's what we want here, especially when you're playing tournaments. And so the right-hander for Miami, for the Marlins, Sanchez, definitely a guy I'm interested in stacking Atlanta against. Of course, the guys you want to get a part of that stack are your Acuna, basically everyone. Freeman, Ozuna, Duvall, Albies. Atlanta, I believe, is now number 1 overall in baseball versus right-handers. We can navigate again back over to that. Here on Fangraphs, yeah, number 1 overall in baseball, 130 WRC plus, hits for a ridiculous 236 ISO. So good luck, Sanchez. Maybe he'll do it again, but I'm favoring the Atlanta Braves tonight in that lineup. And if we want to talk about specific bats, again, you can almost go anywhere in that lineup. Some of these guys really stand out, though. Look at Freddie Freeman, 222 WRC plus. So if you guys have been following me, if you pay attention to these videos, if you have followed this far in this video, you have not seen a 222. Anything above 200 WRC plus. Freddie Freeman has it. Let's go there, obviously. But other guys, Travis d'Arnaud, 179. Ozuna's hitting very well this season versus righties, 153. Duvall, surprisingly, righty on righty, 121. All these guys are just mauling right-handers. Dansby Swanson, 130. 177 for Acuna Jr. Again, I am very interested in the Atlanta stack tonight. I will be stacking that a bunch of different ways against Sanchez, especially in tournaments. Last but not least here, I did mention very quickly the New York Mets. Now, the Mets logic is not necessarily, I'm going heavy into them. They're only projected 3.6 runs. They're against my boy, Tyler Glasnow. But if you notice Glasnow, if you follow any of his starts, when he struggles, it's not often, but when he does struggle, it is against lefties, and he does walk a ton of batters. So sorry, it took me a second there. He has had several great starts in a row, but then you have starts like this against the New York Yankees. Gave up 5 hits, 3 walks. You can see 2-3, 3-2-3. Has had a 3 walk against Miami earlier this season, coming off 2 walks. He does lose control at times, and as a result, gets banged hard and gives up a ton of runs. And as I mentioned, if you go back again to the top teams versus right-handers, New York Mets sitting at number 3, very comfortable number 3 here. Have hit for power, have hit very well, have a nice WOBA. Specifically, which players? Well, I mean, there's a lot of players that hit lefty. The thing is, he could be facing a pure left-handed lineup, a very dangerous pure left-handed lineup. But Cano 150, WRC plus, Nemo 178. All these guys above 100, if not above 150. It is a dangerous lineup. I'm not interested in Glasnow, but I am interested in a very small ownership of a stack of the Mets against him, and that's kind of where I stand on that. And so that's kind of it in terms of stacks. There might be some interest as the day goes on. One other stack I might consider. I don't want to give you guys too much information here. But on the other side of that, the Tampa Bay Rays versus the Mets here. Michael Wacha pitching for the Mets. You can navigate down to him. Not having a good season. Hasn't been good for the last couple of years. You can see I already brought his stuff up here. He has gotten hit pretty hard. All his numbers are career worst. 42 hard hit percent this year, by far his worst of his career. 7.7% barrel rate, again, by far worst of his career. So I'm just not into, I am into possibly a Tampa Bay stack. More interested in them if you see somebody like Austin Meadows playing. I just don't know if he is. But regardless, I do have interest in picking some of those bats off that lineup. All right, and so that covers the stacks. If we want to talk specific individual bats, guys that aren't necessarily a part of these stacks I've talked about. So basically, if you're not playing one of the stacks, get exposure to the guys that I mentioned that are a part of those stacks. That goes without saying. I'm not going to pull out Freddie Freeman and say play him. I mentioned him because of the stack. That's one reason you're into the stack. Make sure you get exposure to those guys regardless. So those are one-off bats, even if you don't take them as stacks. But in general, other one-off bats that are not a part of the stacks I mentioned, first and foremost, I want to mention maybe not my favorite bat on the slate, but at $3,000, Brandon Belt does stand out. I'm not stacking the San Francisco Giants, but generally I am interested in some one-off bats due to their high total, their high projected total. I want to take you into the San Francisco lineup here versus right-handers, which is they are facing a right-hander tonight. You can see certain players, particularly Brandon Belt, stands out with 183 WRC plus. Alex Dickerson right behind him at 156, and Mike Yastrzemski, however you pronounce it, 155. So all three of those guys stand out to me as potential one-off bats. I'll pull some of those up. I mentioned Alex Dickerson, and then Mike with a Y. He may be out of this lineup. I haven't checked injuries yet, but obviously if he's out, he's not of interest. But definitely Alex Dickerson at $2,800 and Brandon Belt, really interesting spot for them because they're $3,000 and below. It's a value spot for both of those players. Another team I mentioned that is a high total tonight is the Chicago Cubs. As a result, I don't want to stack them, but I do want to get interest in or get exposure to certain players, specifically Schwarber and Ian Happ here. Again, you're saving some money, $3,100, $2,900. You're going to need these types of players with your Atlanta and your Dodger stacks. So those guys do stand out to me as good values, as one-off bats. Marcus Semien, he hasn't been having a great season. Another $3,000 player facing a lefty in Urias in Los Angeles. I do like him. He typically leads off or hits second for them, a guy that has always hit lefties very, very well. So again, I am interested in him. In terms of Boston's lineup, I do like Rafael Devers tonight. A little bit expensive at $3,800, but a guy that does stand out, has been hitting excellent so far in 2020. One of their better bats, if not their best bat in that lineup. A lineup that has been much of a letdown, but nonetheless, he has had a great season and expensive at $3,800. Those guys in general stand out to me. We can quickly utilize the lineup tool here or the projections of Daily Fantasy Nerd. Some of these guys I mentioned, Happ stands out. A lot of these guys, Paul Goldschmidt, I do have interest in him versus Danny Duffy. I just don't like stacking against Duffy when they're in Kansas City. Kansas City obviously really puts a damper on bats, on scoring as a ballpark. But $3,600 a first baseman, Paul Goldschmidt does stand out. We can add him to the lineup here. He is definitely of interest as a one-off bat. Other guys, though, I mentioned Schwarber, we mentioned Devers. Those guys stand out. If we want to talk value, we'll sort this by value. Now, these lineups aren't out yet, so it's definitely tough to tell, but you can see certain guys still continue to show up. A lot of the guys I already mentioned still show up. So, in general, we're doing good here with these one-off bats. But to quickly recap, I talked about pitchers. The two guys I am most interested in are Kenta Maeda, most notably Kenta Maeda, and Kyle Hendricks is number 2. In terms of stacks, I like Atlanta. I like the Dodgers. I like the New York Mets as a scary boomer bust against Tyler Glasnow odd stack. And then, of course, I do like Minnesota, who has the highest run projection on the night. So those are kind of the stacks. I talked about some of these one-off bats. Hopefully these videos are helpful for you guys. Hopefully you're winning some money as we close out the MLB season. It's all that matters here is you guys are having fun and winning some money and finding these videos useful. If they are useful, give them a thumbs up, share these videos, comment down below if I've missed anything, but please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Outside of that, I wish you guys the best of luck, and I will catch you in the next video.